Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Congratulations to everyone who didn't want to bear through the Bo Horvat speculation for another month and 2 days. You win. The NHL has capitulated to your demands. He has been traded much sooner than the trade deadline, and you are free from, is Horvat going to be a Detroit Red Wing at the trade deadline conversation for now.
Are we, though?
At the trade deadline, yes.
Are we, though? The Islanders have plenty of opportunity to fall out of the playoff race by then.
I don't think Lou Lamoriello is going to be that crazy. Can you imagine they trade him after trading for him within the span of a month?
The NHL isn't fun enough for that to happen. And of all the GMs, that is probably the least likely to have any fun. Lou Lamoriello's at the top of the list.
Oh, he's a plenty fun guy.
Remember how how hockey media invented Nazem Kadri to the Islanders in the summer because everybody was so confused by how little he had done?
There is a good chance that Lou Lamoriello has a signed, sealed contract for any given free agent in the NHL at any given moment, just because no one knows what's in that drawer, and he's done it multiple times. Lamoriello's drawer, is there or is there not a contract that's signed in there? You'll only know once you open. Anyway, it's a bad comparison. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. There has been movement in the world of trades, which means there has been movement in the world of what's going to happen with the Detroit Red Wings at the trade deadline. Lots to talk about, all things Detroit Red Wings, NHL hockey, and lots more. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we'll cover the Bo Horvat trade, what that means for either one of those teams, who won, who lost, does this make sense, and how does this affect the Red Wings? We are starting to sound like one of those memes, like the Patriots had that a lot in the NFL. Like I think the hockey equivalent was, but how does this affect the Leafs losing in the playoffs, that kind of thing. But yeah, how does this affect the Red Wings? We are joined this episode by Max Bultman, recently returned from Sweden, to give his report on what he saw, tagging along with Rogle, watching Marco Kasper, Wallinder, which I think we need to update our pronunciation of that one, William Wallinder, and plenty more there. We'll get into some NHL news if we have time, and then overtime. Before that, this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we want to mention Winged Wheel Podcast Night, or better said, Day at the LCA. What that is a partnered event with the Detroit Red Wings where we host a live episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Special guests have featured Ken Daniels, Mickey Redmond, and others. We do giveaways, we do prizes, merch, apparel, things like that, Q&A, meet and greet with the special guests and us, the hosts. So it's a live episode of the podcast, and you get access, or I should say your ticket gets you into the Red Wings game as well. So that's against the Pittsburgh Penguins on Saturday, April 8th. So your ticket gets you access to both of those events. It's a discounted ticket. You get a special Winged Wheel Podcast discount, and a portion of the proceeds benefits the Jamie Daniels Foundation. DetroitRedWings.com/WWP to get your ticket. We've sold out the gondola. We've run out of lower bowl tickets as well. We'll work on adding more of those. There's still some upper bowl seats for those who are interested, for a great price. It's a great time. Benefits an awesome cause, and it's a good way to kind of connect with the community, meet some special guests if you are so woefully inclined, meeting us, the hosts, and Evan will sign plenty of stuff for you.
That's right.
Your signature is getting better. It's not. I saw how you signed the Christmas cards.
Oh, that was very quick.
That was a travesty.
Yeah, that's not my actual signature.
People love. I think it might be now. People loved it.
It can be. If that's what people want, I will do it.
I can confirm that he does hold the pen like a toddler holds a crayon. DetroitRedWings.com/WWP to get your Winged Wheel Podcast Day at the LCA tickets. Let's start with Bo Horvat here. Of course, I was on the highway, which meant news was liable to happen, as is tradition on this show. It was announced that the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Islanders swapped major pieces. The Islanders got Bo Horvat with 25% salary retained, so $1.375 million, and that's just for the rest of the season because Bo Horvat was a pending free agent. The Vancouver Canucks acquired Anthony Beauvillier, Atu Ratu, who was drafted just a couple of years ago, and a 2023 first-round pick that is conditional. It is top 12 protected, which means that if the Islanders pick ends up anywhere in the top 12 in the 2023 NHL draft, then the Vancouver Canucks don't get that pick anymore. They then get the 2024 first round pick. Obviously, no conditions on that one. So the Islanders built in some protection for themselves there in what is going to be a very top heavy draft. So Horvat with some salary retained for Beauvillier, Raty, and a conditional first. Initial reactions.
The Islanders? Really? Without an extension already in place?
You have to imagine there's an extension there,
It's in the drawer. It has to be in the drawer.
Has to be in the drawer. It is insane. It is an insane move with no extension in place.
No. So to come to the defense of the Islanders, there are a bunch of reasons this makes sense. There's more that argue the opposite, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt to start. The first, and the one that I don't know for sure, but I heard Lamoriello's contract is up this year. Although with Lamoriello, you're never going to fully know. But if that's true, a GM in his last year is always going to do whatever he can for his own self-interest. So never overestimate that part of what this could be. But more importantly, the Islanders are old. That is not a team that is set up well for the future. They have not had a lot of premium draft picks in recent years. The average age of their forward group is about 42. Their average cap hit is about $9 million. Like, team is in one of the worst situations salary cap wise for the foreseeable future. They almost don't have a choice. And we talked about this before. You have to play the market based on where your team's at. And even though the Islanders are not very good and they have, according to Dom's model, a sub 20% chance to make the playoffs, they can't rebuild either. The contracts that they have do not allow them to. So you might as well acquire Bo Horvat. I'm surprised there was not an extension in place ahead of time. Don't know if Vancouver allowed them to, but
apparently not. Apparently they did almost no. Like, obviously, teams know. Like, let's be real here. They know what the player's going to want. But I don't think Vancouver opened it up much, if at all.
Yeah, I'm sure Lou has a really, really good idea of what Bo's asking for. But still, there's never any guarantees, even if it is likely. And yeah, the Islanders, though, they have the great equalizer. You know how that old saying that always made us roll our eyes, just get in, and you never know. And we would, in the Mrazek era, go, okay, well, Mrazek almost stole a series from the Lightning once. So,
yeah,
you could do that 4 times in a row, right? Well, the Islanders are possibly the best goalie in the world this year in Ilya Sorokin. So if they just get in with Bo Horvat added, yeah, they could make some noise. It's very much in the realm of possibility that they could make some noise. So would I do this if I was the Islanders? No, of course not. They have a 19% chance to make the playoffs with him. If he doesn't extend, they gave away a premium first-round pick. Aatu Raty could still be like a third-line center in the NHL, which is valuable. And Beauvillier's, his contract's not ideal, but he's a usable middle six winger. That's a lot to pay for a rental for a team that does not have a good pipeline and is not in the playoffs.
The way I look at this is I was actually pretty impressed by what Vancouver brought back. And I know that's not necessarily the most popular opinion, but I'm looking at this with full factoring in all of the conditions and context of where we are at, which is Vancouver has essentially announced to the world that Bo Horvat was as good as gone. Bo Horvat essentially acknowledged as much. Pretty much everyone knew that Vancouver wasn't going to reach terms with Horvat. Most people could have deduced as much just by looking at their cap-friendly page, but it was weird that they just kind of let that leverage go. Even if 31 other GMs know you're blowing hot air, you don't really say it out loud. But that was out there, so that's a drop in Horvat's value. They just signed JT Miller again. It relates to the last point. They essentially boxed Horvat out with that money. That drops Horvat's value. Horvat is a pending UFA. That drops Horvat's value. So did they get a lot based on the fact that they have a premium first or second line center who's on pace to score more than 50 or around there this season. Has always been a really good player, having a career year and a contract year, but still always a really good player. No, I don't think so. But considering the mess that is Vancouver, how Horvat's value has been tanked, and what's gone on publicly, I'm pretty impressed that they walked away with a pretty good first-round pick. I think the Islanders were smart to protect it top 12. Beauvillier, who once upon a time was a much better shooting talent, seems to have evaporated. But yeah, you can use him in your middle six. I think they'd be smart to flip him, honestly. And yeah, Raty is nothing to scoff at. I think they wanted project picks, guys who had a lot of potential, who maybe haven't exactly panned out where they are. They want to see if they can maximize them. Take that swing. I'd love Detroit to do that a little more. I would, Raty is a great example of that. So was all of this good all in for Vancouver? No, they have a black hole on their team in multiple spots with multiple anchor contracts, but I was reasonably impressed with what they did with this one.
It gives them more ammo to do their retool on the fly, I suppose. We'll have to see how things wind up with the Islanders come the end of the season, where they finish, and if that protection actually kicks in. If not, they've got a first-round pick for next year, and if the Islanders really implode, that pick will look really good. So, yeah, considering Vancouvered themselves, the return they got was actually quite excellent.
What would you rather have happen if you're Vancouver? Get the 13th overall pick in this year's draft, or get a blind 2024 first for next year?
Oh, a blind 2024 first.
The Islanders,
sure.
They're trending down, right? Like, there's no way the Islanders are better next year, right? Could they be? They're older.
I think good teams have more staying power than we give credit for, and they don't just disappear overnight. But yeah,
they've got the goaltending. They still have some intriguing players, but can they really compete in the Metro next year? I guess that remains to be seen. But I mean, either way, I think Vancouver likes that first round pick. That was probably for me the centerpiece in the trade.
Yeah, and that might be the reason Vancouver did this trade early, because there probably weren't a lot of teams around the Islanders slot in the draft order that were kicking around on Horvat. And, the 13th overall pick versus Tampa Bay's 30th overall pick, hypothetically, is a dramatic difference. So obviously that being the centerpiece of this trade was probably a very big deal to the Canucks, which makes a ton of sense. And yeah, either way, if they get a mid-round pick in 2023 or, the wild card pick in 2024, that's a huge win for them. Because, as Evan mentioned, especially in the Metro, there's this weird 3-horse race in the Metro right now between the Islanders, Pittsburgh, and Washington to see who can get old last.
Yeah, who can hang on to the previous era's window, yeah.
But yeah, Carolina's not going anywhere. New Jersey's very much on the up and up and looks like they're built to be very sustainable for a long time. And, obviously the Rangers are the Rangers, etc. Yeah, and then there's Philly and Columbus, but...
They're at the children's table.
Yeah, but that's still 6 teams competing for 3 to 5 playoff spots. So nothing's guaranteed for the Islanders here. And the way this season's gone, it's an uphill climb. And yeah, there's so many fascinating factors here. Like, 'cause again, I completely understand why the Islanders did this. They almost had to. They had to make some sort of big splash, because as they were constructed before Bo Horvat, they weren't making the playoffs, and they were not in a position to get better for next year with their cap situation. So, you go all in. I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't their last move. I could see them being aggressive and trying to get a head start on the trade deadline to crawl themselves back into the playoff race before everybody else loads up.
It'd be smart.
Yeah, I mean, because the problem with the Horvat trade from the Islanders' perspective isn't the Horvat trade. It's everything they've done over the last 5 years that put them in the circumstance where they had to do this. So you're here. All right. I mean, I don't agree with anything they've done to get to this point, and I don't agree with this, but it's the hand that they have, and they have to play it.
So Brad said something in there. The teams around where the Islanders were in the draft slot. There weren't many other teams that were probably offering up first-round picks anywhere close to that. And you're probably thinking, well, you've been saying that the Red Wings were in on this. Yeah, and they were. Steve Yzerman was and has been interested in Bo Horvat for some time. I don't know the details of specifically what was offered, but it does not take a rocket scientist to conclude that Detroit probably wasn't offering up.
They weren't giving up a first, that's for sure.
A 2023 first-round pick with the Bedard lottery on hand, not to mention Fantilli, Karlsson, Michkov, and all those other guys. So that was probably a big leg up for the Islanders. There were reports out there that, you know, some teams were frustrated because apparently the Islanders or the Canucks didn't shop the Islanders offer. Maybe true, maybe not. That's honestly something you hear a lot from teams who are just peeved that they didn't get a chance to match when they'd been lowballing the entire time.
Yeah, I don't feel bad for them at all. Like,
No.
Put your chips on the table and play. Like, don't get all mad when they do business with somebody else.
What do you mean Michael Rasmussen in a third wasn't worth it?
Well, yeah, like what was Vancouver interested in? We've heard the Rasmussen thing, which we talked about last episode, and that would make sense. What would an equivalent offer have been? Like Rasmussen, you can take either like Mazer or Bertuzzi, depending on how you value either of them. And
Well, Bertuzzi wouldn't have been
a
factor.
first, like
The closest Red Wings equivalent would have been Rasmussen, Mazer, and a first. That's about what you were looking at. Now, there's some differences there. I think the Red Wings offer, had they offered that, would have been better. Not that Rasmussen's necessarily better than Beauvillier, but he's got a much more appealing contract than Beauvillier, which would have some extra value to it. Mazer versus Raty, I'd probably give the edge to Mazer. And then obviously the Red Wings first-round pick would be better. But that is like fractions of differences between these players. So that is about the package Detroit would have had to have offered. And again, that was the trade without an extension. So if there was an extension, if Vancouver gave Detroit permission to speak to Horvat, they agreed on a contract, and a contract was signed and then traded, that price goes up.
I disagree. I think these prices are all factored. I think this is all factored in, and everyone's just playing coy because they have to.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, the contract's in the drawer, sure. But
the NHL would never.
But
No.
Until we know that or we see that extension signed, we have to go on the information that this is what they paid for Bo Horvat as a rental.
Well, we know what Lou Lamoriello is doing as the morning ends on March 3rd.
Oh, yeah. No.
Just to steal the news cycle at that moment.
Again, I think we can all assume it's coming. Otherwise,
We have another topic to
they're
talk
kind
about.
of insane. But if it doesn't, again, so would I have made this trade if I was the Red Wings? No. They were right to not outbid this.
That was going to be my question. I agree.
Yeah.
I think there were versions of this trade that I would have been okay with from a Red Wings perspective, but just once you start to get into first round picks is when I get really squeamish. I think there's player deals, like roster players that the Red Wings have right now that I absolutely would have been okay with, but overall I get squeamish when you talk prospects or firsts, especially in a player in Horvat's situation. So that's the trade. We've talked a lot about how this may have been the Red Wings for some time. Obviously, it's not now. Yeah, there's a chance Horvat comes in the summer if he doesn't actually get signed. But until he's not signed, that's not worth speculating on it unless we know for sure there isn't an extension. In which case, thank you, Lou. Does this change anything for you if you're Steve Yzerman? With the information that, Horvat was an option for him, what does this change for you? The Red Wings trade deadline, the Red Wings outlook, Larkin's contract, etc.
Doesn't change much. Definitely doesn't change the trade deadline. This probably gives Larkin more leverage in contract negotiations because now assuming Horvat stays on the island, Marco Kasper is your number one center next year. Like
the number, if Larkin, and I want to preface this by saying I think we've been going too hard at what if Larkin leaves just for the sake of acknowledging that side of it. I'm going to qualify this by saying I think Larkin stays, but if Larkin goes, your number one center next year is, without adding someone else, is Andrew Kopp, and then you hope Marco Kasper makes the team and gets up to speed. That is
not ideal.
We're not going to do that.
Yeah, Joe Veleno's on pace for 25 points this year. Love Joe Veleno. He's a great down the lineup player. But he's on pace for about 25 points this year, and right now he's the number 2 center next year if Larkin leaves. So
let's get out of this hypothetical. I don't like it. It's making me sad.
What this does is it really almost makes Larkin, I don't even know what to call it, the fork in the road. Larkin stays, okay, you probably keep trying to push forward. Larkin leaves, the rebuild lives. They won't have a choice. And it's even an uphill battle with Larkin staying. And like we've acknowledged that and we've talked about that, but at least that gives you like, you get a Pasternak, a Timo Meier, an equivalent player in a trade or whatever. You can see the path to making that work. But Horvat was one of those options to be the quote unquote supporting cast. He's not. That market gets narrower and more expensive. And Larkin's looking at this going, I see the market. Well, I should say Larkin's agent is looking to go, I see the market. I see what your options are. Here's Dylan's number. And then Stevie has to be really betting on either A, he knows at the last second he'll come up to Larkin's price, or he's betting on Larkin really liking the city of Detroit.
I think it's the latter. I just see like there's not so much distance between where the two camps are at where I'm not concerned about finding a middle ground. But I do think, yeah, in the end, Larkin's going to want to stay. He'll take whatever that middle point is, call it 8.75, call it 8.5, call it 8.25. It depends on how much Steve wants to squeeze. The cap is going up, so I'm a little want to think that it's going to be closer to 8.5 or 8.75, something like that. Whatever it might be, I just think that Larkin's going to want the Detroit factor, the captaincy factor, this is his team. He wants to see through the rebuild factor. I got a text from a good friend, and they were listening to one of our Larkin conversations. And they said, I understand that you want to acknowledge the very real possibility that Larkin leaves, but are you really worried about it? And I said, honestly, I do think the deal gets done. That's where my money is right now. I'm not worried about it. Like there's a small amount where I'm like, yeah, this could happen, and you have to be realistic about it. But what am I actually worried about from a fan perspective here? I'm worried about if this goes past the trade deadline and Yzerman doesn't sign him before the trade deadline. Larkin has his no trade clause, so he holds that power. I maintain that if they decided it's not going to work out, I don't think Larkin would burn the Red Wings like that. But then again, you don't know how much animosity, if any, is in those conversations, so I won't speculate there. But if this goes past the trade deadline, then yeah, they're pretty locked into having to get this done. They have to get this done. Yeah, if you lose Larkin before the trade deadline, does Detroit become, one of the top 5 teams in the Bedard lottery? I don't think so. I think there's just too much junk beneath them in the standings.
There's too much Chicago and Arizona.
Yeah, far too much. And we've seen bad teams win games down the stretch. You can point to the exact win streak that moved Detroit out of the position that ended up winning the Jack Hughes lottery. Like, it's just the way it shakes out. Intentionally trying to tank like that, you have to start it way sooner, and that's what Chicago and Arizona have done. But you need to go into that trade deadline, which we've talked about ad nauseum, is such a pivotal one for the Red Wings, with the knowledge of what are you doing with Dylan Larkin. And I say need to, and that's in my opinion, and there's a real chance that we go past it, and Yzerman has, a strong spine, I'll say, to keep it a little bit more PG. And I mean, that's why he's GM, and we've seen him do it before. But the anxiety level goes up for me once we go past the trade deadline and there's no Larkin contract. So that's my wish. Steve, if you're listening, if you know the number everyone's going to settle on, everyone let's come to the table, bring some coffee, just get it done, and do the fans a little favor before the trade deadline. That's just me, though.
Yeah, and like I said, that's exactly what I mean with Dylan Larkin being Horvat signing, now making Larkin the fork in the road, because he has to have a plan going into the deadline, because it's either this is the team going forward with or without Larkin, and that is two very different paths.
Well, we'll see. To everyone who, and I think, we talked a lot about the reporting on Horvat based on information that we had, and we probably didn't do proportionally as much of would this have been the right move. To everyone who really hated the move, and I know, Brad, you especially didn't like it,
As it played out. I'm still, pro sign Horvat in the offseason for a reasonable number if that makes sense. But yeah, I wasn't giving up a first in futures for him.
Yeah. For everyone who hated the idea of that trade, congratulations. There is one less thing to worry about in the many things to worry about. Maybe not worry, but to pay attention to closely if you're a Red Wings fan right now. That's a lot of, spooky what's going to happen in the future. Let's get to something a little bit more positive. We were joined by Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit, and he has just concluded a second trip to Sweden with The Athletic, where he covered, this time, Rogle. So he took a look at Marco Kasper, what William Wallinder is doing over there, and a lot of other great stories. So without further ado, Beers with Bultman, our returning segment. Enjoy. Max, the last time you went to Sweden and you came back, I kind of cut you off at the knees because you were gracious enough to come on the podcast after you got back, and we talked about all the stories, but then I took a little jab at you because you went to a McDonald's in Sweden, and that has followed you around, and every time I see one of those jokes on Twitter, I just cringe a little bit because I know.
Is that how that got out?
Yeah.
I've been wondering that, why did I ever tell anyone that I did that?
Yeah. I'm so sorry, man. And that's a big lesson. And I need to stop underestimating, there's no throwaway comments on this podcast because people can rewind and hit play again. So you just got back from Sweden and this is your opportunity.
I did not go to McDonald's. I actually went where Lars told me to eat. So I went to this burger bar called Roast, I think, or Roost. I don't know if there's the accent over the O. I think it's just Roast. Awesome burger. He recommended it. Allison actually has still been talking about that burger since we got back. So that place was awesome, and it was not McDonald's. Let's get that very clear.
We're getting better and better each trip. If the Athletic sends you to Sweden again, you'll be eating at Michelin star restaurants, I'm sure.
We ate at some really good places this time. I was I can't say my food choices were all that much more adventurous. I'm still pretty much a meat and potatoes guy, but
right.
much more you're somewhere else, eat like you're somewhere else kind of thing,
That's good. I'm happy to hear personally. And also,
I didn't do his weird pizza though. The curd banana.
No, man, he needs help for that. That's an affront to.
No disrespect. But it's not for me.
No, yeah. Folks, Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit recently returned from his trip to Sweden to observe some key Red Wings prospects. How are you doing, Max?
I'm good. I'm back. I'm back feeling like I'm in the land of the living. It actually took a lot longer this time to readjust back. So, yeah. But I'm doing good, and I'm happy to be on the other side of most of the stories. I got one more project story from that trip that could take a little longer to put together. But I got the Kasper story out today, Wallinder last week, and so I'm making progress on all that stuff.
Okay, speaking of stories, we're not going to dive deep into this. I just need to know.
Yeah.
Did you have any pre-written words about Bo Horvat that you had to delete?
No.
Okay.
Thankfully, I wrote that. Harmon and I wrote a piece last week that is kind of breaking down why I didn't think it ultimately made sense, but what the appeal is, if it is, and what it's going to cost. And I'm glad we got it out when we did, because if we had waited until yesterday, it would have had a real short shelf life.
Woof. Yeah. Okay. So you talked about a couple of Red Wings prospects in a couple of articles that are out. I'm going to preface this all by saying, folks, Max has already published 3 pieces related to his Sweden trip. One while he was there. He's a maniac, and 2 since he's been back. And I know there's another big one coming out, Max, that we were talking about. So if you don't already subscribe to The Athletic Detroit, please do. Max is, again, it's must read. It's the first thing I do in the morning when I see he has an article. And these are great pieces. So let's start with Wallinder. Max, you were talking about the Red Wings defensive prospect. What did you see in his game, and what stood out to you?
Well, I think that it's what's supposed to stand out with Wallinder, right? It's the skating at that size, and I think that's always been the package. The first game I was at, I wouldn't say any of the Rogle players looked all that good. They'd had a tough night. They lost 6-2. But I think you still see tools even in a game like that. And in the second game, really over the course of the week, I watched practices too, but I thought you still saw the maturation that his game has kind of undergone. It's not trying to, rely so much on those tools constantly, even though they can help him problem solve when he needs it. But you also saw him, cut back and regroup, or make the quick pass back to his D partner rather than trying to, do everything up ice. But you still see the ability to make that stretch pass, to lead the rush, to transport the puck. And I thought he took a couple of good routes defending too it's important to see. I mean, Jake Wallman, we talk about this year, a guy who's an elite skater, has some size to him, right? Like defensively, that's as much an asset as it is offensively. Even though I think we think of skating as this offensive asset, I think it's as big an asset defensively, and that's what you needed to see. I still don't think that's his calling card of his game yet. I think he's a more offensively inclined D, but the Red Wings want him to be a two-way D, and I think he's going to have that ability to be. And I think, my big takeaway, and this was the story, is it's really the maturation of William Wallinder, and that's what I think you're seeing.
Usually prospects who aren't, the biggest names, whoever the Detroit's first pick was in that draft, who are overseas, they get overlooked a little bit. So I know Wallinder caught some people by surprise when his name was starting to get out there in terms of, really progressing well. So with Rogle, he's, I think their most utilized player by time on ice right now. Yeah.
Significantly.
And from what I gather and from reading your piece here, that all tracks. Like he is, has been really successful so far to date in the development path, and he's looking like he can challenge for an NHL roster spot. Would that be a fair statement?
I think he'll have the opportunity to. I thought last year when I saw Simon Edvinsson, I thought Simon Edvinsson was going to come over and make the team. Like I thought that full stop. That didn't happen. Wallinder plays a bigger role than Edvinsson did last year. I think his numbers are ahead of where Edvinsson's were last year. I still think I really liked Edvinsson's defensive stick, I'll say. But it wouldn't, Wallinder's a year older than Edvinsson, period, which means his play in the SHL this year is 2 years beyond what Edvinsson would have been when I saw him last year. I think he'll have the chance. My guess would still be Grand Rapids, but, we'll see what happens going into camp. We'll see what the Red Wings look like. Where's Oli Mata at? Is he in Detroit still? All that stuff. So, and obviously where's Edvinsson at in his progression? But my guess is Grand Rapids, I guess, is a long way of saying, but I think he'll have at least a chance. And when you play a role that big in a league like the SHL, like you got a chance for sure.
All right. Off to the big name in terms of the great hope for Detroit in terms of their center future, Marco Kasper, and what he's been doing over there. I've only really heard really strong things about Kasper's game, and that it's even underappreciated without the attention he's gotten since becoming a Detroit Red Wings first-round draft pick. Marco Kasper and his development path, first of all, let's say, what did you see from him while you're over there?
So in his draft year, I think I was on him pretty early. I really liked him, especially just the profile that I think fit for Detroit. And a lot of the things I saw, the compete, the physicality for a young player, but the skating, the intelligence, the responsibility, right? Like that's all there. I don't know that I really gave enough credit to his offensive game. And I think that's probably a pretty universal, thing. That was the big question, is how much is he going to score? I think you can still ask the question, right? But the guy has the puck a lot. Like you watch his game and, can that even occasionally get him into a little bit of trouble? Maybe. But like the guy has the puck a lot. He transports the puck. He retrieves the puck. He shoots the puck. He goes in, he can make a play with his feet. He can make a play with a pass. Like there's a lot of nice elements to his game. It's not like we're talking about, Connor McDavid hands necessarily here, or Nathan McKinnon or whatever. So don't get that idea in your head, but like there's a lot of really good elements to this player. I think one of the names I would throw around in his draft, or a couple of them, was I think Anthony Cirelli, and I think it might have been Corey who used Sam Bennett. But I think there's even more offense than that, and so I might have probably undersold that part of his game at that time. Where exactly is he going to fall? I don't know, but like one of the names I think I remember using was Nazem Kadri. I think that might even be a more apt comp at this point after seeing him. And I mean, Kadri's coming off an unreal year. I'm not necessarily saying it's that, with whatever he had 90 points with the Avalanche, but in terms, I really think there's like a 50s to 60s point center here. And maybe it's more, right? Like, I don't know that I saw Matty Beniers being a point per game center right away either, but I think there's certainly, a very well-rounded player here, and I don't just mean that to mean defense. Like, there's a lot of elements.
That's what I've noticed with this game too. Is first of all, agree fully. Like, I don't think very many people who look at prospects gave Kasper enough credit. I think those who are really in tune with the Swedish hockey world were kind of banging that drum from the beginning. But yeah, definitely he's kind of been proving people wrong step by step. But yeah, in terms of what you notice from his game, that well-roundedness, and then as a byproduct of that, NHL readiness, like he is playing the kind of game where it should translate, again, not to say he's an automatic shoe-in to make the roster, but it kind of gives him a leg up in terms of he plays the kind of game that gets you onto a roster sooner. Fair?
I think that's a really good way to put it. Like, just like I said with Edvinsson, I think I know I need to be a little more reserved in how readily I proclaim stuff like that. But the stylistic elements, right? Like, you talk about what does it take to adjust to North America? You got to be ready to play with the speed. You got to be ready for the increased physicality. Those might be the two best things in Marco Kasper's game. He's a great skater. He plays with a ton of pace, and he is not afraid to mix it up. He's not afraid to throw a hit. He's not afraid to take a hit around the net. Like, we're talking about probably the two strengths of his game, and his compete and his pace for me. So like, yeah, it would not surprise me. Like, the question, as with all Red Wings prospects, is what kind of role are they going to have, right? The Red Wings aren't going to want to keep someone in Detroit to play a fourth line role when they could have a top line role in Grand Rapids. But if he could play a top 9 role, which in this case probably means a third line role, I don't think that's out of the question. So that is what it's going to come down to, right? He probably has to prove that he is more deserving of like a third line center spot than like a Joe Veleno, for example. And I think that's possible. Veleno's, I expect to keep getting better too, though, right? Like, we see the kind of steps Michael Rasmussen took at that same age, 21, 22 years old, and wouldn't shock me one bit if Veleno, takes another step there. So, that's a good thing, I guess, for the Red Wings if that happens. But I do think he'll challenge, because I think just you put it exactly right. Like, his style is what I think it plays into what is the most challenging part about transition to North America.
There is also, mocking up too far into the future, which is what we're both want to do, I think. You imagine a trade deadline or a couple trade deadlines where the Red Wings really leverage the wingers that they have and move them to maybe try to get a center or get other pieces. There could be a slot also for Kasper on the wing just to start, right? Which isn't uncommon. I think you mentioned that. You start at the wing and you move to center eventually.
Larkin did that, right? Like, I think you can certainly say, they could break him in there. But they have also, like, the Red Wings under Yzerman have mostly kept those guys at center, right? Like, even Rasmussen, who I think most people kind of believe he's better on the wing at this point. Like, they've tried to keep him at center pretty consistently. I think Veleno's best as a center, but I think it's worth noting his faceoff percentage is below 40%. They're still going to him at center. Like, they've wanted these guys to play at center when they view him as center. So it's definitely possible. It's happened many times in many organizations, including in Detroit. But I do think in Detroit, they haven't done it as much under Yzerman that way, right?
Right. And this all kind of leads to the last point about Kasper, which is that he is by far Detroit's most important prospect, right? Not that they have they have the opposite of a stellar center core, but he is, like, they need him to land. Otherwise, they're in a really, really bad spot.
They do. I think you could say the exact same thing about Edvinsson, to be honest. But yes, at least there's more depth on D. I get your point there.
Yeah.
He's super important. I think both of those two guys are players you're looking to contribute, sooner rather than later, and to become top half of your lineup pieces. And if they do, you look a lot different than you look today. If they don't, oh boy, the clock, the calendar has moved and you haven't, and that's a scary thing. So, the stakes there are huge, and there's no doubt about that. And I think it's a lot of pressure, on both of those guys. And I think that's one of the tough things, the sneaky toughest things I think about being a rebuilding team is you don't get to have prospects just like take their time and, get to kind of fly under the radar and help you when they can. I think about even like a Cole Perfetti, it was not impossible that the Red Wings could have drafted Cole Perfetti at 4th overall the year they took Lucas Raymond. Instead, he goes to Winnipeg. It takes a little bit longer. But I think he's a really good player now. I still think Lucas Raymond's a better player, but I think Lucas Raymond gets a lot more scrutiny because the Red Wings need him to be way more than Winnipeg needs Cole Perfetti to be right now on a given night. And I think that's a really tough disadvantage that prospects face, on rebuilding teams. Like, you're asked to be a savior or something very close to that at age 19, at age 20. And, that's usually not how it works, even for really, really good players.
Which I'm sure probably was a pretty big factor in Seider and Raymond's respective slumps at different points this year.
Sure.
Some keys from all your articles regarding your trips to Sweden has been the involvement of Nick Kronwall, Håkan Andersson, other key Red Wings players in terms of, or I shouldn't say players, executives in terms of development, drafting, etc. And then on the, related to that is the Abbotts and how they run Rogle.
Yeah.
What kind of both direct support system and ancillary support system are the Red Wings working with that you've noticed? And do this without spoiling too much of your upcoming article on The Athletic.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think I'd say the Abbotts are a big reason for, first of all, just why Rogle is where they are, right? Like they came in, they're an organization that, recent history certainly had been kind of up and down from the SHL to the Allsvenskan. It's a relegation situation, relegation promotion, and they would kind of bounce between them, never really threatening. They get there and they all of a sudden become one of the top, over the last 3-4 years, you can argue the top, club, certainly in terms of the regular season. They made it to a final. They made it, another deep run. They had the COVID year. They could have made a deep run. They've been awesome as a program, and they've transformed that place. And I think part of the way they've done it is with young players. And I think that's appealed to, Wallinder mentioned that to me. Like he said, that's one of the things that stood out to him is what they had done and how they'd worked with young players. Kasper ends up at Rogle because his dad, who was an agent in Austria, had some clients who played with the Abbotts in Luleå in the SHL. And so they're in a lot of ways responsible for bringing in, some of these prospects here, but they've also helped develop them really well. Everybody knows, I think, how Moritz Seider's year there went, and, the best defenseman in the SHL that year, and really launched him to Detroit. And I think when you see the steps that guys like Wallinder and Kasper are taking, they are a huge part of it. But I do agree with you that I think Nicholas Kronwall is a really important character in this too. Wallinder told me that he's there twice a month. I think he was there the week before I was there, so I timed that poorly. Could have, when I went to Frölunda, it was while Lidstrom was there. Would have been great to be at Rogle while Kronwall was there, but nonetheless, it definitely sounds like he's made an impact. And I know he mentioned kind of angling. I talked about the routes he was taking. That's pretty much exactly what I mean. So no surprise that Nick Kronwall has his fingerprints all over that, right? And I remember I was going back looking at old articles when I was writing the Wallinder one to see kind of what were the notes, early in this guy's career. I think I found something from Sean Horkoff saying that's a relationship, Wallinder and Kronwall, that they really wanted to nurture and emphasize because they felt like it was going to be really productive for him. All indications are that it has been. So, I definitely think, that there's a good infrastructure there. The Red Wings have been, I don't know if it's luck or if it's not luck, but they've been fortunate one way or the other. They've benefited from having their guys in Sweden in these really good programs, different programs for sure, and how they do it between Frölunda and Rogle. But, 2 of the 4 or 5 best programs in Sweden, I don't think I would be off base in saying, Lars will certainly correct me if I do, no shade at, Växjö or, Skellefteå or, Färjestad, but
look at that pronunciation.
Yeah, I've just got to flex on him a little bit. No big deal.
Okay. On that note, we are running into risky territory where I have to start to keep up with you on Swedish pronunciations, which I will absolutely not do. So let's bring this back to Detroit now.
Did Elmer say his name? I haven't listened to the episode yet.
Max, he said in much kinder terms, he does not give a shit. You can say what you want. Yeah. He said, Soderblom, those are both fine. I know for a fact that plenty of people, I would wager more people back home say Soderblom, but he doesn't seem to care about carrying that over.
Well, the thing is, I only know it really from the Seymour broadcast. So the only way I can hear it in my head is the way the announcers would say it after he does something just absolutely nutty, right? He's
right,
taken his stick and gone all the way around a player and then cut back and scored or whatever. I can only hear it in that level of enthusiasm of Elmer Soderblom. And so I wouldn't even know how to say it at a regular tone of voice.
I completely understand, especially with how much time we've had to watch prospects before they reach the Red Wings. But I've started to just subscribe to the easy, and this is a cop out, but the consistent model of whatever they tell a broadcaster, either in Grand Rapids or Detroit. That's what we're going with.
I don't think people appreciate the amount of like detail that Ken puts into that. Like, at camp, he'll tell me, right? I'll run into him and he'll be like, have you heard this guy pronounce his name? I'll be like, no, this is how I think I heard it when I would watch him in Sweden. And he'd be like, okay. And then he would like go ask the guy and get him like, okay, so what is it? And he would just have it like down, right? And I know people, with like Jonathan Berggren, right? Like, I think people were like, just say Berggren, but it's like, that's what it is. Like he is not trying to put any stank on it. Like that is, he asked, he got the detail. Like if you hear Ken say it, he's just right. Like period.
Yeah. And I don't think that applies to all broadcasters because you've seen other broadcasts who don't take that care. Totally. Especially with like opposing teams. But yeah, no, he absolutely does all of his homework on that front.
100%. He's as good as it gets in the sport. In sports, I will say.
Absolutely. Like would go to bat for that 7 days a week. Okay, sports, the Red Wings, the trade deadline coming up. Again, you are free from having to write even more Horvat articles. But knowing that was an area that the Red Wings were interested in, right? It wasn't just, fake smoke there. That was actually, those tires were being kicked pretty heavily, but ultimately Horvat ended up going to the Islanders. It doesn't change the fact that this is another fair or not question here. In my opinion, this has the potential to be the most pivotal trade deadline the Red Wings have had since Yzerman jumped on the team, because, and this is related to what he did it'd be related to both what he did last summer and related to Bertuzzi and Vrana's trade value essentially evaporating, so to speak.
You think Bertuzzi's has evaporated?
Not to the same degree as Vrana's. I would still give it like maybe a 10 to 20% chance that a team pays for him on reputation, or a team believes that Bertuzzi's struggles are a mix of rust and just not fitting into the Lalonde system, and they think he could do well there, which I actually don't think would be a bad bet. I just don't know that you could ask for like a first plus for him anymore.
Not plus. I think the question is, does he get a first? I guess I would lean maybe not, but I would have said like lock yes a year ago minus the vaccine. And like, it's a competitive market for wingers, I think. But like, a guy of his profile, a little bit of edge to him, not a little bit, edge to him for sure. If you retain some cap, it's probably as good of a number as you're going to get a guy on. Playoff track record. You don't have to look. He's having a bad year. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But I think it's a pretty clear outlier year in his entire NHL career, right? Like, there have not been any like this. So I think it's diminished, but I think it's not I think you can still see a good return there. What does it look like? I don't know. Like I'm doing my Who Says No mailbag right now. And, that's one of the, obviously no shocker, one of the ones that I'm wrestling with, but I think there's value there, but just the fact that we're talking about it, whatever the value is, if he gets traded, the Red Wings don't have him. And I think that speaks to your point about how pivotal of a deadline this is, because that's what we've talked about as a core piece for years. And if you trade him, then you don't have him, right? That's how that works. Last time I checked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people still will incessantly suggest trade him and then sign him back in the summer because he's an unrestricted UFA.
Which never happens.
Almost never. No. So, and that's actually another thing is have the injuries in the outlier season maybe increase the Red Wings odds of signing Bertuzzi. And then it also begs the question of, do you want to sign Bertuzzi long-term if you're the Red Wings?
I think it increases the signability. But it's still a real good question of whether that's something the Red Wings should do. I mean, he's going to be 28, I think, at the end of this month. What is the term on that? Like, do you really think you're going to contend in the next 3 to 4 years? I think you should hope to. I think the moves from last summer says they at least would like to start taking those steps to. But you're weighing the opportunity cost of whatever that cap hit is, plus whatever you could have gotten in a trade. I think the more value is probably on trading him, but I can understand, especially if they see a opportunity to get him on a contract that they did not think was possible 6 months ago, and you bet on the bounce back, I see the argument there, no doubt. I mean, he's a guy that brings a ton of energy to a team. He's obviously got chemistry with Dylan Larkin, even if it hasn't happened that way this year when they've been together, but it hasn't happened for him that way with anyone. It's a real, I think it increases signability. There's no doubt about that. I think there's just still a really good debate to be had about what are you willing to do, right? What would you do?
Oh, I think I would have advocated for, 6 or 7 years if we were having this conversation at this time last year. Probably for more money than I'd care to admit. But
this time last year, we were talking about, is he doing a Brad Marchand where he just at 26, 27 becomes a star, right?
Yeah. And it's really hard to attach, the two broken hands to the back. And then there was the groin recently. And I know we're making, at least I, to a certain degree, am making mountains out of molehills, but you get concerned, right? Like you see the trend of injuries, most of them avoidable, some of them not. Like some of it, I think he genuinely gets in the way of pucks a little bit more than he should. And then you see the kind of incompatibility with this new style of game that Lalonde wants the Red Wings to play, and agree with that style or not. That's what the Red Wings have, and Yzerman's not going to make another coaching change on account of Bertuzzi. So it all kind of begs, like, I just don't see a need to sign. I wouldn't see incentive to sign him longer than, 4 or 5 years in my mind. And at that, which I think still could be attractive to Bertuzzi for the right price. But, they got to sign Seider, they got to sign Raymond. Larkin very obviously still needs a deal. It's a lot scarier of a prospect than it was before for me.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't think it's an unfair. I think it's unfair to call him injury prone because you're right. Like, it's not like he's got one injury that keeps happening over and over again. But I don't think it's unfair to look at the injuries as a byproduct of the way that he plays, right? Like, and it's the reason you love him. It feels terrible to hold that against him. But throughout his career, when he was coming up, he battled the concussions, and he seems to have gotten that, past that. Like, that has not been an issue for him in Detroit. But, like, when you're in the way, when you're playing a gritty game, it means you get hit by pucks, and it means you get into situations where you're going to get tangled up or things are going to pull, right? Like, Larkin has had, honestly, a similar thing because he plays, I think, a harder game than he probably even gets credit for. And he's missed a little bit of time and had to play through a lot, the hand that he played through. I think we're still talking about him as above a point per game if that doesn't happen, or even if he just doesn't try to play through it, but he does. These guys are sacrificing here, and so it feels wrong to hold it against them. I don't think it's an unfair consideration though, because if you're signing a guy, you're signing him because of that style, and in some ways, if it seems like that style is going to take him out of the lineup, you have to weigh it, right? I don't think you can ignore it.
So the Red Wings are currently positioned where Bedard isn't impossible. If the end of the season goes a certain way, you might have a dart at the dartboard, so to speak. The playoffs aren't impossible, but the way they're playing, they're not exactly trending towards challenging for that. Bertuzzi's value, at least somewhat diminished, or at least it's going to be a tougher sell. Verona, I think a lot would have to change.
He just cleared waivers. I don't know that there is trade value there, right? I guess if you retain half, maybe, but I don't know that there is.
It's not going to be for the same trade value that we would have been talking about a year ago.
No.
And I think we talked the last episode on the podcast, and you feel free to disagree, but I think the Red Wings are right now playing to where everyone realistically expected them to be based on the lineup. But the change in the value of Bertuzzi and Verona and the fact that Larkin is unsigned has left a lot of people uneasy. So all of that factored in, what do you do this upcoming trade deadline if you're Steve Yzerman?
I'm selling. I'm selling to get, the ideal. I think you're looking for more Jake Walmans. You're looking for whether they're prospects or players who you really like, who you think are close to contributing potentially as soon as next season. I think people forget that Jake Walman was either this. I don't know how you want to. We'll never know how the Red Wings viewed it, right? But I think in how we assessed it, we talked about Jake Walman like the second piece in that trade to the second round pick, and Oscar Sundqvist as the third. Yep. I think there's a real chance that we look back at that now. Jake Walman is clearly the top asset in that trade now. Oscar Sundqvist, what could he could bring you a third round pick at this deadline potentially. That's a great trade, I guess, just as an aside. But my point is you're looking for players like that who I think are, the approximate value there was probably a second or a third round pick however you view Jake Wallman. So if you have the opportunity to get a guy like that rather than a second or third round pick, I'm taking it. And if you just have the chance to get the second or third round pick, I'm taking that too. And I can either trade it for someone like Ville Husso, or I can, hang on to it, make a pick, and try to get a prospect in what should be a really interesting draft. I can use to trade up if I'm picking 12th and I want to get to 10th or something. Trades in the top 10 don't really happen much, but or if you want to get up from your early second rounder and you want to get to the top of the second round for a guy who fell, it's good to have those things. So I'm selling, and if there's a piece that I think can help me in the near term, I guess I'm not afraid to trade a draft pick for that either, but it's not with the eye toward this year. It's with the eye toward next year or beyond.
We're going to have a bigger roundtable, I think, once we can wrangle Prashanth, once he's free from his son's
He's hard
grasp.
to wrangle.
He is. He's a tough man to book. Last question here. Dylan Larkin is unsigned. By all accounts, he's anywhere from, him and the Red Wings are anywhere from a million to let's call it 1.4 apart in ask, in that range. Overall outlook, still think it gets done?
Yeah.
You think, yeah?
Yeah, I do. I do. I just think that in the end, both of them want this to happen. And I think that it will. And I think, we see this happen sometimes where it seems like it should happen and it takes so long that you start to question, is it going to? The two, obviously I think everyone's covered the Steven Stamkos ground by now. But I think the other one that's a really interesting comparison, doesn't directly involve either of these guys, is a guy who I think you can make really good comparisons with Larkin their whole careers, and it's Gabriel Landeskog. I don't think Larkin's going to sign for the number that Gabriel Landeskog did, but I think you saw a saga play out where it got really close to the 11th hour of, is Gabriel Landeskog going to not be a Colorado Avalanche? How can this be? And in the end, the fact that Colorado had the 8th year and he wanted to be there got him at a number that maybe was not his first choice, but was, he felt good about. I don't know that I see, I don't think Larkin should have to do that, I guess is what I'm saying. If I'm Steve Yzerman, I would have tried to split the difference and maybe even then some by now, because I just think even $1 million is not worth having to replace that guy. But I do think that they will find a way to get it done. Wherever it falls, it's somewhere between 8 and 9, right? I just think it has to get done. And when you consider, what it is on 7 years, there's that argument. You can consider the comparables and just the fact that Larkin does have leverage here, even though people want to treat it like he doesn't. He's got a full no trade clause and a team that has to have him. Certainly can't lose him for nothing. That is not leverage in the Red Wings' favor, I think, as some people talk about it. That is leverage in Larkin's favor. They got to find a middle ground here, and I think they will, because I think they both want it to happen. That's just what I think, and I think it's going to happen. I would be floored if it doesn't, and that would be just a shocking earthquake of a day in Red Wings land, right? And that's partly why I just continue to come back to, well, then it's going to happen, because it's almost too crazy to map out what they do from there if it doesn't.
That's too hectic of a late night story to have to type up.
But yet I would have to do that.
And yet you would. Speaking of which, I always fumble over this, and you would do a much better job than me. So tell people where they can find your work and how to get to it.
Yeah, you can go to my Twitter at @M_Bultman. Any link to The Athletic, that would be awesome, because then I get a little bit of credit for it. But you don't have to do it that way. You can just go to theathletic.com, click on any story, hit the paywall, or don't hit the paywall if you already subscribed. We love that. And subscribe. So, love to have everybody on board. It's always a fun time of year. We got some more fun stuff coming. Like I teased earlier, we got the Who Says No mailbag, which I think readers always enjoy submitting their proposals, and then we analyze who takes them and who doesn't. I actually got more in the ballparks this year than, the mailbag itself was unhinged. There was 400 comments, and only 10 of them were not terrible, but I think
458 as of right now. I'm looking at it.
Yeah. But the ones that I picked, I actually found myself I kind of like these. So I think there's a few hits in the mailbag this year, which is unusual.
Okay, that's exciting. Okay, folks, like Max said, The Athletic Detroit. I know he said you can sign up however, but if you sign up and you don't do it through one of his links on Twitter. Brad Crisco will move into your house under your front porch like a box turtle, which is not a desirable situation. So unless you want that woeful situation on you, click the links on his Twitter page, give him a follow, subscribe to The Athletic. Max, thanks so much, man. We have a busy month and 3 days ahead of us, and so I'm sure we're going to be talking plenty.
I look forward to it, man.
All right, cheers. All right, and that was our interview, or our segment, Beers with Bultman, where Max gave us a great report from Sweden. I mean it when I say that reading The Athletic Detroit is worth it just because of Max's work. So please do subscribe. Do so through one of his links on Twitter. And I was very real about my threat that if you don't sign up through one of Max's links on Twitter, Brad will move under your front porch like a box turtle, and no one wants that. That one catch you off guard?
Well, I am house shopping right now.
That fit nicely. Some Red Wings news before jumping into overtime here. The Red Wings and pretty much AHL goaltender Jussi Olkinuora agreed. Well, they waived Olkinuora for the purpose of contract termination, and the two parties agreed to terminate his NHL contract. Olkinuora is going back to Europe to continue his pro career. He has been with the Griffins all season and has not been good. He put up a .868 save percentage, a .375 goals against average. Stopping pucks has been a problem in Grand Rapids all year, pretty much until they got Ned. That was just the end of that. They're going to roll with Ned and Bratstrom, and maybe if Kosa gets called up from time to time. I know a lot of people are saying, does this mean anything for Gylander and Kosa? I think they just weren't getting good goaltending from him. He probably wanted to go back home. And the Red Wings had no problem letting go of a guy who just wasn't stopping pucks. A little bit of a theme with the Red Wings organization.
Yeah, if you're going to be bad, at least be bad at home.
And you know what? Like, he was going to play more, and he probably knew that that's where his future was going to be, right? So it's better to get a head start on that. So
yeah, he's in his 30s anyway, so he's just looking for the most comfortable lifestyle at this point.
Can't imagine. So could this mean things for making it easier to call up Kosa or in the future Gylander and things like that? Yeah, sure, but I wouldn't read too much into a lower impact move like this. I would love to spend a lot of time to talk about the other things. You know, there were conversations on what the San Jose Sharks want for Timo Meier, the NHL viewership conversation. There's the whole what Bettman said about rebuilds, things like that. We'll save that for another episode. Actually, last thing here. It's important to note any of the complications that might come with trading Tyler Bertuzzi. And Elliot Friedman, I believe on the Jeff Merrick show, did mention that Canadian teams still aren't certain if Tyler Bertuzzi, if traded to a Canadian team, could then come over and play games in the States, which sounds backwards. Pretty much no one knows what the rules are anymore. I think the American side is changing some things in May. I don't know if it relates to the border at all. I don't know if Bertuzzi would qualify now. I chatted with someone in an American organization, not the Red Wings, and they said, no, Bertuzzi would be good to go if traded. But this was, in September. But now Canadian teams are saying this, and they might have a better read. So if trading Bertuzzi was, too simple for you, then it just got way more complicated. I'm sure there's a lot of work being done on the back end to see if he could be a target, but that's absolutely something that Vancouver, Toronto, any one of the Canadian markets who might be interested would have to figure out before trading for him, which sucks for trade value.
It is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, you certainly can't change it. I'm tired of that conversation. I hope it just gets resolved at some point. But anyhow, as we've mentioned in the past, we don't control the border rules on the show, so don't yell at us. All right, we're going to jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast, which is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patrons are the whole reason this show happens. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast. If you want to join the so-called Dub Club, you get access to things like the Patreon exclusive Discord, which we have been making better and better every day. It's a wonderful community. We have also been giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game this season, the vast majority of them going directly to patrons. And in addition, you get entered into every single giveaway that we do automatically. Plus, you get access to our Patreon exclusive bonus overtime episodes, which record right after the main episode. And when there are fun bloopers, which I think we have at least one this episode, we tack those onto the end of those as well. So we let loose, have fun, answer your questions, and just have a good time. Bertimzi says, what are some ideas you have for making the All-Star Game and skills competition more watchable? What events would you add / change or remove? Cheers, boys.
I've had the same idea for years, and I stand by this idea, and I want it to happen. Have all the normal All-Star skills events, but you pick one random beer leaguer to hop in for all of them so you can just see the context of how truly elite these guys are.
I still want to do the challenger type format where someone says, I want to challenge Connor McDavid to fastest skater if he's the winner from last year or whatever. I'd love to see stuff like that. Like, why can't Martin Ferk go in for the hardest shot, even though he's not an all-star? Like, why can't they just do that?
I would love that. If you want to make the game exclusive to the guys who are picked, that's fine. But if a guy wants to take his vacation time on his break to come in and try to blast a shot through the net, let him do it.
No, we can't have that.
This is one of my answers that's dead on arrival. I want them to make the game mean something again. Remember when it meant something?
Like home ice advantage or something in the playoffs.
I even hate that as it's coming out of my mouth, but I would games that become intense are so good. And I would love for them to be able to manufacture that somehow. I don't know. Like, you can't do a cash prize. The NHL bleeds money as is. They're not going to offer more enough to the players to make it worth it for them. Home ice advantage would be cool. Preferential scheduling for I don't know.
Something. Yeah.
It's a stupid idea, and I know it, but I just know I have the most fun watching old All-Star games or ones where the players actually get into it. If you can find a way to tap into that, that'd be great.
I think they need to move away from 3-on-3 because those guys all get banged up the night before. Like, only the children don't know that, but maybe some of them do at this point.
Yeah.
But I could not imagine, like, when was the All-Star game in Vegas last year? Like, can you imagine going to the All-Star game as a player who's in their 20s, a multimillionaire pro athlete, and then having to play 3-on-3 hockey the next day?
Oh my God.
That's an absolute nightmare. So I think they'd have to move away from 3-on-3, at least 4-on-4, to see any sort of, uptick in competitiveness.
Andrew Pillin says, knowing the massive King's ransom it would take to whoever lands first overall, is there any part of you guys that would be open to trading up to grab Bedard? How much of the future would we be willing to give up to take him?
Yes, I'd be willing. I don't know if you offered the entire Red Wings roster right now that it would get it done. And I don't think I'm joking. I think if I were another team and you offered the entire roster, they would say no.
Absolutely open to it. Brad's right. The cost would be monumental. There isn't a single untouchable player in my mind if you're trading up for Bedard, and I know that's an insane comment. Maybe if you have to protect one, then Seider. But even then,
like, if you're trading up for Bedard, like, just understand, Raymond and Seider wouldn't get it done. You would have to add.
I don't know how many first-round picks you can trade, but it's going to be all of them.
just click add until they grade out.
It's going to look like a CHL-type trade.
In reality, it would be a lot of firsts. It would be one of Detroit's premium pieces. Like, I don't see any team doing it without Raymond or Seider in there, and then they want at least one of Kasper or Edvinsson, and then, it would take a lot. It would take a lot. Or it should, at least. Would you do it? I think you should. I would love that. It would be insane, and it could absolutely backfire. But
what if the Red Wings had the first overall pick, and other teams were throwing the CHL trades?
Nope.
No.
What if it was like 3 or 4 first-round picks?
No.
Their top young player. I'm trying to think of it. Okay, Anaheim says they'll give you their next 3 first-round picks. Zegras, Jamie Drysdale, Mason McTavish.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You do that one. I was going to say.
Yeah, like
that's pretty great.
Yeah, because if you take Zegras, Drysdale, and McTavish off of the Anaheim Ducks, those 3 first-round picks are going to be going to be in the Bedard range.
I think there definitely is a ceiling.
They're going to get Misa in a couple of years.
Yeah, jeez.
Keenan O'Donohue, Johnny Burgers, Meals on Wheels. Keenan is a brand new name level sponsor. Keenan, thank you so much for your support for the show, man, and all you do. Says, hey, this question is for Brad. Since I've never skated wheelchair, so sledge hockey, I can't really see the mechanical issue in Andrew Crystal's skating. Do you have any thoughts? I love scouting, but it's so hard to see the issues in highlight clips versus full games. Thanks a lot.
It's hard.
Crystal or Crystal?
I'm pretty sure it's Crystal, but
I like Crystal because that's funny.
It's objectively better, so we'll go with that. It's hard to explain without video, and that's not a cop-out, because some guys have a really wide stride. Some guys have a very short stride. Some guys just have a weird hitch in their stride that's almost hard to explain unless you're physically pointing it out. Skating's tough because there are guys who are awful technical skaters, but they get around the ice real well. So every situation is unique. And then sometimes it's just a strength issue. And then you look at someone like Crystal who, all of the above probably track to some degree. It's hard.
I've really worked on over the past few years looking at their explosiveness, their movement in tight, their edge work, rather than just top end speed. Because you can, like Brad said, if you can get away, if you can get around the ice well, and if you can move in the small areas, the NHL ice is smaller, well, then you can get around well.
It's probably better, it's better to have separation, be able to separate yourself, than have high end speed, because there's very few opportunities to get the top gear at the NHL level.
Defenders, and you know what? People always talk about the advancement in the game over the past few years. Forwards are faster and faster and faster. There's not a lot of conversation of what that's done to defensemen. Defensemen who can skate are absolutely necessary at this point if you want to have a chance in hell at defending in the playoffs. Otherwise, teams who are built on speed and skill will destroy you. You can't just be big. You can have one or two big guys, but if you have a bunch of meatheads and no one to actually win puck races or cut off lanes, think about Jake Wallman, you're going to get burned. So yeah, skating, getting that separation is way more than just being able to get up to a high top speed in a straight line. Okay, this question from JJ Frankie JJ says, we all want Larkin to stay and win a cup in Detroit, but if you look at contract talks as a player, money is only half of the equation. Playing on a winning team and having a high chance of winning a cup would make playing the game more enjoyable too. If you were Larkin, would you take a 5-year, $9 million contract and go to a contender and pass on an 8-year, $8 million contract if that was the final best offer in Detroit? No, that's the difference between $19 million. I don't see how you do it.
Yeah, that's a lot of risk, and that's a lot of money to leave on the table. And, as much as hockey's a sport and hockey players are competitive and, they all have the passion and the love for the game, it's a job. It's their career. They have to do what's financially going to make the most sense for their life. So I'd rather make that much more money playing on a basement feeder with certainty than going in and maybe winning a cup and then wondering if I get another contract over $2 million when I'm into my 30s at that point. So, well, not well into, but in my 30s at that point. And, the big question here too is how much does Larkin believe in the path the Red Wings are on, right? Does he think there's a chance? Oh yeah, we suck now, but maybe in 2-3 years, yeah, I could see this team maybe getting up to the tier of insert whatever other team he's thinking of signing with.
Seider and Raymond having the seasons they did last year may have a bigger impact on Larkin staying than we probably initially give it credit for.
Dude, I would say like 70% of our episode titles last season had Seider or Raymond's name in them, and we probably still undersold how important those seasons were for the rebuild. Can you imagine where the Red Wings were at if Seider and Raymond were progressing as normal? They would be they would be absolutely, I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
All right. This one from Chance Larkins, who is a new patron. Chance says, I felt Lobstradamus call out to me through the luminiferous ether. Join the Patreon, loser. Tasked by this voice from beyond, I had no other choice. In all seriousness, though, you guys do an excellent job, and I finally got on board with the Dub Club after being a freeloader for the last 5 years. Keep up the good work, cheese bags. Chance, thank you so much, both for the beautiful poetry and for the support. Just listening means so much to us, but anytime folks join the Patreon, we really can't say thank you enough.
If people want to start one-upping each other for dumb reasons to join the Patreon, this could be one hell of a bit.
I'll take it. And then one here for Jeremy Dahl says, hey guys, amazing job as always on everything. And I want to give a shout out to Jeremy's wife and little sister. He's taking them to an Oilers game again this year in Edmonton. So I always appreciate Jeremy trying to make more hockey converts. He says, I hope it's just as crazy as last year, maybe with a win for us this time. You guys rock and are just the best. And I try to suggest your podcast to everyone who I think will listen. Jeremy, thank you for doing all that. It means a lot. And shout out to your wife and sister. I hope they enjoy the game. Maybe the Red Wings can get a win on the road. Beat Connor McDavid, nice and easy.
Defeat Ken Holland.
All right, we are going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. We are going to be back with you on Sunday. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate it. If you want to support the show, if you want to, support our fundraising efforts for the Jamie Daniels Foundation, Winged Wheel Podcast night or day at the LCA, joining the Patreon is a wonderful way to do it. It really helps us out. But if you just want to tune in, that means a lot to us too. So thank you to all of our listeners, new and old, all of our supporters on Patreon, our name level sponsors, Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Armchair GM / Genius, Nick Perks, Terry Driver of the number 69, Crying Ryan Hannah's Banana Slam and Jamathon, Glenn Brabham, Aiden White, Keenan O'Donohue, Johnny Burgers, Meals on Wheels. Matthew Keenan having Meals on Wheels kills me, man. Matthew M. Rice, Croner's Left Knee, Carl Bertana Nanaluski, Chimmy, Chris P, Citizen High Five, Connor Scovey, Coyote Season Tickets in Tempe, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Hared Hot Ronik, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, who I believe is a new name level sponsor. Joel, welcome to the Dub Club. Joseph Barry, Kalen Wood, Kevin James, King Tone, Las Ensaladas Picantes, Marcus, Massive Wong, Evan Longsaber, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Nedeljkovic, goalie number 1, Nicholas Fritz, R.A., Ryan Hubbard, Scott Martin, Send It Seawolf, That's What I Appreciates About You, Tomato, Tomato, Potato, Potato, Zachary Rogers, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, number 1 Detroit Red Guys fan, Antonio Gracias, Babe Landeskog, Ben Barron, proud member of the Jake Wallman Gritty Club, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, Carl Thames, Connor Leighton, Darren Fick, Philip Zadiznuts, Grand Rapids Hockey Guy, Griffey Boy, Heronix Handlebar, I can't tell if this next name is dirty or not, Fluffernutter. Yeah, I'll leave that one in.
Pretty sure that's actually like a candy or a snack.
James Laporte, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, John Evans, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Lieutenant Matt S. of the Cheesebag Army, Linda Hull, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Ophelia, Ricky Bong Rips, Servo, Steven, the Hodag, and finally my favorite patron, Matt Keeler. Thank you all so much. We'll talk to you Sunday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.